The first time I met Jim Starrin was in June of 1974 or 1975. It was at the Consumer Electronics Show. I was at the AKG booth. I was buying a lot of AKG microphones, but I was not buying them direct as a dealer. Ted Pappas was the rep at the time, and Ted introduced me to Wayne Rayback, who right away pushed me off onto Jim Starrin. And I met Jim. He was dressed in a leisure suit that had kind of bell-bottom flares on it. And Jim showed me around the booth a little bit. And after we looked at the microphones, he sort of hobbled when he went over to the headphones. And I said, "Hey, Jim, what's going on? You got a little bit of a limp." And he said, "Oh, my dogs are killing me." And then I realized he only had one shoe on. I said, "Well, Jim, did you lose a shoe?" And he said, "No, I found a shoe." Hey, Jim and Penny, it's Jay Bridgewater out here in Manhattan, Montana. Unfortunately, we got too much smoke to see the mountains today. They're a little hazy. But I wanted to take a few minutes to tell you, everyone there at the party, sorry I can't make it. And unfortunately, I can't tell you most of the stories I have about Jim. However, I can tell you a couple of them. Shortly after Jim started calling on us, he opened us up with a few lines. He left Ted Pappas, started with another rep firm, and then left that rep firm. Found himself without very many lines with the start of Jim Starrin Sales, which was in Hobart. So Jim and I decided, let's go and find some lines. So we decided to go to the AES show together, which was in New York, and only room we could find, because the place was booked out, was at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. So we get there, we take a cab down to the Waldorf, and they couldn't find a reservation. It's getting dark outside, it's Manhattan. What are we going to do? Where are we going to stay? And, you know, Jim's getting a little flustered. I don't have any clues what to do. And Jim goes back up to the bell clerk and says, "Hey, you know, if President Reagan was coming tonight, would you have a room for President Reagan?" And the little clerk said, "Well, of course, Mr. Starrin, we'd have a room for President Reagan." And Jim then replied back to her, "Well, President Reagan is not coming tonight. I'll take his room." And as a result, we got a little bit of a chuckle out of her, and she did find us our room. In 1977, we opened our first retail shop on the south side of Chicago. And Jim's territory for most of his dealers were like Jonathan and Susan Lipp up in Madison, and Uncle Bob's Music. And then on Friday nights, he'd be headed home to Hobart. Jim and Penny were both living in Hobart at the time. And he'd stop by the shop and he'd work the retail floor. We'd always have a few reps stop in Friday nights and help out the rest of our sales staff. And the Friday night that comes to mind right offhand was Jim had a client come in, and he had 2 or 3 band members with him, and they were all relatively large African minority people. And they asked for a room. And I think at first Jim thought that maybe they were looking to get a room up in the apartments upstairs, but it turned out they wanted to get into our soundproof live and dead end studio to listen to different microphones. And Jim showed him a few different mics. Of course, I think he showed him Electro Voice at the time. And after about 15-20 minutes, they all left, and Jim came out and he made a sale. He sold them an RE16 microphone. And I said, "Jim, do you know who that was?" And he says, "No, the guy never told me the name of his band. But he said he needed a new microphone because they were going to record a video the next night, and he wanted a new microphone for the video." So I said, "Well, Jim, you know," and I explained to Jim who it was, and I don't know if Jim ever heard of him at the time or not, but here's the video they made the next night, and I think you guys will appreciate who Jim sold the RE16 to.
Buddy, that's all we're gonna do. Got my mojo working, but just all we're gonna do. I wanna love you so bad, don't know what to do.
So on this Friday night, Jim was the Atari rep, and Atari sold a 1-inch tape machine that, in order to get in the US to be competitive, they put consumer preamps in it. So this machine had microphones and line inputs. And as a result, this recording studio had the machine set in the wrong setting. So Jim agreed we'd go to the recording studio. And on the way to the recording studio, we'd stop and get something to eat. You gotta remember, there was only 3 recording studios in Harvey, Illinois. There was a country and western studio. There was Curtem Records, which was Curtis Mayfield. And then there was this little jingle house that was down in the basement. And that's where we were headed. So on the way over, we just stopped at a little rib hut. And of course, we were the only 2 white people within miles of this place. And we go stand in line, and the guy ahead of us is extremely intoxicated. And he sort of turns around and notices Jim and me, and he looks at us, and he says, "Oh, white honkies." He says, "The problem with you white honkies is your dicks are too short and your tongues are too long." And Jim looks at me and looks back at him, and Jim says, "Excuse me?" And I'm saying, "Jim, we got to go. Let's get out of here." And the guy says, "You guys are white honkies. Your are too short and your tongues are too long." And with that, Jim looks at me, looks back at the guy and said, "Well, maybe some women like men with long tongues." And with that, the manager came out from behind the counter and asked both of us to leave as he escorted us out. So we go to the recording studio, and at the recording studio, there's all these cars from Detroit parked out front. And it's getting dark, and we don't want to spend a lot of time in this neighborhood, so we go downstairs, the bouncer lets us in, and on one side, the rhythm section's just jamming and grooving. And they're actually recording, getting ready to record a McDonald's commercial. But at the time, they were just getting warmed up. And on the other side was the vocal booths and the drum booth and things like that. So I get the recording system working. We got rid of all their distortion. And about every 2 or 3 minutes, they had this big fish tank downstairs, big glass fish tank. And at the bottom of the fish tank, there was an electric heat plate. And every 2 or 3 minutes, someone would take this paper bag, open up this fish tank, and pour all these green organic materials onto that heat plate, and it would go woof, and the whole room would fill with smoke. And everyone's, just whatever. I can't find Jim, and it's time to leave. Jim's over next to the bass section, pretending he's a bass player or something. I'm not really sure what he was doing. But we decided it's time to leave. We leave, and I don't know what happened to Jim after that. I went back to my office and fell asleep on the couch. The next morning, it was 11 o'clock, the retail store was open, and my sales force was in my office and woke me up. So I picked up the phone, I called Jim's house. Penny answered the phone. Penny was not very happy that I had Jim out that night before. And finally, Jim took the phone away from her and hopped on the phone, and Jim had a terrible, terrible headache. I don't know how he got the headache. Maybe it was just being in that room. And he says, "Hey, by the way, who is that band that we were grooving with last night?" And I says, "Oh, those guys are from Detroit. They're the Ohio Players." And that's the story of the night that Jim hung out with the Ohio Players. Traditionally, the name Starin is synonymous with high-quality product lines. But what a lot of you younger people don't realize, at one time Jim even sold radios. Like this $600 Proton radio that was sold in the late 70s. I still have mine and it works well. Starin did sell some real dogs over the years, and I know me as a dealer, I lost tens of thousands of dollars on this line. Jim probably made the commission on it regardless. But for you employees, it really caused a lot of grief, a lot of phone calls, and now it's time for retribution. And you all might recognize the line I'm talking about right here. And as the movie Network said, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore." You want help? I can't get it unlocked. up. A friend of mine, John Guerin, coined the word smooth jazz many years back, and Jim Starrin really coined the word relationship selling. And through the years, Jim and I had formed quite the bond, to the extent that a lot of you don't know, in 1982, Shirley and I got married, and with Jim as my best man, she was a little concerned that the wedding might not go real smooth. I don't know why she thought that. But the wedding did go pretty smooth until it came time for Shirley and I to get down and kneel in front of the minister, and Jim standing next to me. And it's very quiet, and someone's singing some Ave Maria song or something like that, and the congregation starts to laugh. And Shirley knew that we did something, so she's saying, "What's going on? What's going on?" And she's said, "What are they doing? Why are they laughing?" And before the wedding, Jim and I had put the words "help me" on the bottom of my shoes, and the congregation saw that when we kneeled down. So, but that's pretty much all I have to say for today. I hope you guys have a great evening and enjoy the rest of the fun and the camaraderie. I'm hoping the doctor will let me leave the county here, hopefully in the next couple months, and when I can travel again, maybe we can get together. So thanks a lot, and we'll see you guys later.